This is The Annex, a sociology podcast. I'm Joseph Cohen from the City University of New York. Today, reactions to the college admissions scandal. Our panelists are Leslie Hinkson from Georgetown University, Margaret Hagerman from Mississippi State University, and G. Beatman from Purdue University. Our discussion was recorded on March 27th, 2019. So I recently read a short piece in Inside Higher Ed about Stephen Mintz. He's a legal scholar from UT Austin, and he was talking about our response to the college admissions scandal. For those of you who haven't heard, there was a scandal a few weeks ago in which a network of parents were discovered to have used bribery, fake athletic credentials, SAT cheating, and other tactics to get their kids into selective colleges. We did a segment on it. You can find it on our website, sociocast.org/annex. And if you listen to the segment, our reaction was mostly like, what, you didn't know this was going on? You should see what the really rich people are doing. So in this piece, Mintz asks, that's what we did. And that was
it is.
That's the extent that anybody did from it. And Mintz is like, are we going to be doing anything about this? So he writes, why is there no talk of ending legacy? Why not spend more money to admit underprivileged students or create a repository of instructional tools or that people of limited means can use, or dramatically increasing enrollment? And he says, listen, ultimately, the answers are self-evident. These institutions want to serve a small, exclusive circle of elites. They don't care about social responsibility that much. And they want as much money as humanly possible. They can have billions in the bank. They want those new revenue streams. What's your reaction? Should we do anything? Is anything? Well, it looks like nothing's going to be done. Should we do anything?
So here's the thing, right? So there are two things that I have to say about legacy, right? I mean, not all legacies are created equally, right? It's one thing to say we should do away with legacies where, there have been these people who have been here since the freaking Mayflower, right? And, and have had wealth since then. And someone who's like, oh yeah, I'm the child of a first generation college student who happened to come to this institution. We have not accrued any wealth yet, right? But we're trying to get there. I mean, legacies can be used as a tool for generational mobility. So this idea that all legacies are created the same, I think that's bullshit. That's overly simplistic. So that's number one. But then number two, and I keep saying this over and over again, one of the reasons why you have legacies isn't just because you're like, oh, we want to serve an elite and we want to serve this elite and we want that to be our primary clientele. That's part of it. But it's also because you serve that clientele, people want to be at your institution. And that includes wannabe elites. That includes people who don't even know who the elite are, but are like, oh, this is a great institution according to U.S. News and World Report, right? And those elites bring with them money, right? And network connections that can actually be used to help facilitate social mobility for those students that you're like, okay, we got room at the end for you. All right. So come on in. Right?
What do you guys think? What's to be done? Should we be doing anything about this college admissions scandal? Is there anything to do?
I guess so. When you say we, do you mean we as university professors, we as overeducated people? I mean, what are you like?
Oh, good question. How about how about both? What should what should elite schools do, and what should everybody else do? Should anybody do anything?
Oh, and time out. And also, before you answer that question, my question is, why should we do anything about it, right? Yeah. Because here's the thing. I kind of feel like this idea that we need this intervention is all premised on this notion that we are this thing called a meritocracy. Which is a notion that was put forth in like a dystopian novel by a British sociologist, right? 50 years ago? So
should we do anything? Should we even care?
I think we should care only to the extent that we continue to push this notion onto our children that the college admissions process is this pure quote unquote meritocracy that is based on these like very transparent like like boxes that you need to check, and if you check those boxes then you're going to get in, and if you don't get in then that just means someone did you dirty.
Well, it's not that we're sending. It's not just a message that we're giving to our children, though. It's also like we're signaling that to one another as adults. I mean, so
yeah. So, what do you think, Jean? What's the appropriate response in your books by anybody?
I really go back and forth about this because, again, like I agree with what your all's original take was sort of like, I'm surprised there's gambling in here kind of response, right? What you actually do to that, it's like you'd have to sort of dismantle the whole admission system, which is, a sort of combination of a variety of different reasons that people actually get into universities, which I guess, so I think I would critique that in the context of critiquing the whole admissions process more generally. I mean, I think, yeah, but I mean, maybe I'm being cynical, but I don't know if I feel like this scandal will lead to any sort of lasting change or discussion, 10, 20 years from now.
Oh, no.
I mean, I actually think that this scandal just reveals that I really, really, and I hope I'm not just being like paranoid or overreacting, but I do think that, in like over the past like decade or two, I think the United States has been like on hyperspeed towards this incredibly unequal society. And because we're seeing this inequality growing at such a rapid pace, I actually think people now think that things that would have been seen as like oh, like you just don't do that, that's just not done. I think people now are thinking, you know what, like why isn't it done, right? So of course people have known for a very long time, yeah, if you got $20 million, right, you can buy this building and your kid will get into whatever school, right? And and we knew that it was done, right? But people didn't say, you know what, let me just go and like bribe this tennis coach, right? Like, I mean, that's just go.
Well, that was, right? Yeah, right. That we know of.
No. But what I'm saying, I mean, I'm sure, I mean, there probably were things, right? But I actually think that, the growing inequality in our country, I think has emboldened people to act in ways that act in ways that signal to many of us that like for the elite or the elite adjacent, right, anything goes is now it's the way of the world now.
Maggie, what was your reaction to the college cheating scandal, and did you think any type of reaction is warranted? Or
well, so I have a lot of thoughts about it because it directly relates to my research on privileged kids and the things that parents do to reproduce that privilege. So for me, I'm actually, in some ways it's useful because I've been doing a lot of, work with parents and talking to communities of privilege. And this is a great example of sort of showing the extreme, right? That like the difference between what the parents that are implicated in this scandal are doing or did, and what goes on with lots of upper middle class, affluent white families is a difference in degree, not in kind, And so I think that in some ways this is a powerful example of something that's very, has been around for a long time, and it's a very taken for granted assumption about parenting. Get the best for your kid no matter what. So in some ways, my reaction has been, this is an opportunity to get people to think a little bit more, maybe, about the ways that they secure advantages for their children that reproduce inequality. So.
Yeah. Maggie, will you come to Bethesda to speak to our school?
We need that lecture.
Yeah, well, I have been going to some private schools and things like that, and it's definitely interesting to engage with those communities.
You make an amazing point, though. What's really the difference between the college cheating scandal and somebody who uses their money to buy additional schooling for their kids so they can get into the local university?
Right.
Well, one is legal and one isn't.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. But besides that, what my reaction was should we, when we start seeing these elite pedigrees, And okay, well, one, we know for a fact that these institutions don't give bad grades once you get in. Well, they rarely do. At least that was my personal experience.
I sure do. No.
Right. And so when we see somebody with an elite pedigree, like as opposed to being at like a big R1 school, maybe with more competitive, I don't know, maybe they went through a more open process or a less crap one. Should we be asking if they're just rich kids who bought their way in? Should we be red flagging these elite degrees now, these prestigious degrees, and asking if these kids are really that good or if they were just born rich?
I don't think so. Like I don't think so, Joe. I mean, I can tell you, I won't say all of my students, but the majority of my students work very hard, right? They do work very hard. Does that mean that they did not get help in learning how to work hard or in understanding the value of hard work or in being able to just focus on their studies and, and whatever extracurriculars and not having to do chores and not having to work a job to help, pay the bills in their house, right? I think it's all relative. I think the vast majority of the students I teach are privileged students, right? But of those kids, the vast majority of them don't understand that they've had privilege because they're like, I've just been working my whole life.
What do you guys think? Should we put a question mark on these elite pedigrees?
Put a question mark for what? For what purpose? Like in terms of sort of like considering them for graduate admissions, in terms of hiring.
For example, right now, I think the working assumption is that if you're sitting across from someone who went to Dartmouth or Cornell or whatever, that they were like the best kids imaginable in the country or the country's brightest, smartest, most promising young people, when it's quite possible that their rich parents purchased their way in and that they are more middling than we have previously assumed.
Yeah, I guess I'd want to know who still has that assumption. But maybe I'm just more cynical. Like I kind of always assume that. But
well, I mean, when you're on a grad committee, there are definitely people on a grad admissions committee who certainly care about pedigree.
Yeah, but it's not just right. But in that sense, it's not just sort of where you went to school. It's also sort of the pedigree of the people who are writing your recommendation letters, et cetera, et cetera.
So fair enough.
But do you not think it's also true that this is like part of our discipline, even part of like being at ASA? I mean, people are constantly, like looking at your name tags, seeing what you I mean,
it's an obsession. There's an interesting sort of an interesting view from outside. I hate to be in Canada because I guess that's what I do. But I had friends who went to medical school or law school in prestigious U.S. universities after they didn't get into the affordable Canadian schools. And there is some perception that those who go to the big money schools for at least these professional degrees are paying for it because they couldn't get in for free. So there's nothing intrinsically so awesome about these schools that like it's an assumption. It's a very culturally specific assumption that like you don't have necessarily if you didn't grow up here.
Well, I think it's an assumption, but I think even more than that. I mean, certain institutions confer status, right? And status need not be directly related to things like quality, right? Or content. I mean, it's just status. Like, a Louis Vuitton bag is, in terms of it's like much more of a status symbol than I don't know, than I don't know. Pick one, a Nine West bag.
I don't know what it is.
Than a Nine West bag, right? I mean, you might find the Nine West bag more pleasing aesthetically, but it's not going to confer you the same status that a Louis Vuitton bag will, right?
And the Nine West bag might be more functional anyway.
Exactly, right? And so, I think that what we're grappling with more than anything else here is status, right? And the fact that we are a status obsessed profession.
Right?
Yeah, but it exists because we all let it. Like it exists in our collective imagination. And so because it's not something objective, presumably if we reached a collective consensus that it was not valuable, it would cease to have value.
Well, you can go to the evolutionary biologists who say that no, like status and the quest for status is like, it's hardwired in us as primates. I don't know.
Jean, what were you going to say?
Oh, no, I was going to say, I mean, like, but I think it's also helpful to keep in mind that, like, and that's sort of the Inside Higher Ed piece kind of talks about this too, is that this status serves a purpose. It's not just that we all agree upon it. It serves a role. So, I mean, I think even if we agree that we don't want it to serve that role, we need something else to fill that void. I don't,
You've been listening to The Annex, an academic sociology podcast. You can visit our show site at sociocast.org/annex. We are on Twitter at Sociannex and on Facebook, The Annex Sociology Podcast. Our producer is Liseth Moreno. Music by Lena Orsa. I'm Joseph Cohen. Thank you for listening.